Today we're going to be learning Taanit, Daf Kaf. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Asham Weiss in loving memory of Sarah Yehudit Sharf, Sarah Yehudit Bat Sarah Imenu on her Shloshim. You inspired many with your commitment. You chose the Jewish nation as your people. Hebrew is your language, and the land of Israel and Yerushalayim is your home. Studying intensely along the way and marveling at the privilege. You touch the lives of so many around you. You will live on in the hearts and memories of many. Okay, we are going to start now at the end. We were in the middle of a story of Nakdimon ben Gurion, if you recall. So we had this story, we have Nakdimon, they need water for Ole Regel, for the people coming to Yerushalayim for the holiday. He asked some Adon, some Gentile official nobleman, says, give me 12 springs of water, or if not, I'll pay you a crazy amount of money. Comes the day to pay up, and he doesn't have the money, and the rain hasn't come. Figures by then the rain was going to come. He really never intended to give him all that money. So what happens? The guy comes in the morning and asks for the money, and he says, I have all day. Comes in the afternoon, I still have all the rest of the afternoon. He comes at mincha time, really at the end of the day, says, I still have some more time. And we ended with the Adon, the Gentile man, the nobleman, starts laughing at him and says, right, mocking him and saying, Kol hashana kula lo yarduk shamim. All year long, the rains didn't come. What, you think they're going to come right now? So he goes into the bathhouse thrilled with a big smile on his face because he's about to get a ton of money. We're getting now the picture. As he is walking into the bathhouse, so we have the foil, right? We have the Adon going into the bathhouse, which is the place, we always think of bodily enjoyment, right? You think about the Greeks, and we always talk about it was all celebrating the individual and the pleasure, bodily pleasures. He's going for that. And he goes in with this big smile, and Nakdimon goes very sadly into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple. Right? A place of holiness, the opposite of the Beit HaMerchatz. He wraps himself up, which is funny. You think of wrapping yourself in a towel. He wraps himself in a talit, and he stands, instead of lying in the bathhouse, he stands in prayer. Amar lefanav, he says before him, Ribono shel olam, God, ruler of the world. Galoi v'yadua lefanecha, everybody knows. Shelo lechvodi asiti, I didn't do this for my own glory. V'lo lechvod beit abba asiti, not for my family's glory. But I did for you. I did this for your respect. So that people could come worship you in the temple. I was doing this all for you. So miyad nitkashchu shamayim ba'avim. The sky fills up with clouds immediately. You wonder why he didn't do this earlier, right? So it could be it was an issue of timing. But anyway, you'll see why also in a minute. It becomes obvious that God brought the rain. So because it happens at exactly the very last moment. So immediately, the heavens, right? This is a good example of sometimes you do something at the right time, right? You could do it. He could have prayed earlier and it wouldn't have worked. Maybe he did pray earlier, but the prayer at that moment, exactly when it's going to show all the more so the glory of God, that's when he gets answered. Until 12 springs filled up with water, exactly what he owed. And hotilu, even more than that, they filled up to a higher level than they were previously. As the Adon is coming out of the Beit HaMerchatz, the bathhouse, Nakdimon ben Gurion yatzami Beit HaMikdash, right? So we have both happening at the same time. Each one is coming out of wherever they were, right? Whereas, again, we describe them as polar opposites. When they meet each other on the way, Amarlo, so Nakdimon says to him, I actually gave you back more than what I was supposed to give you, so you have to pay me now. He obviously really wasn't saying you owe me because that wasn't part of the deal. But he was basically trying to say, look, not only did the rain come, but it came even more than, right? He's kind of mocking him back. So now, you think the story's over, but no, it doesn't end. Amarlo, yodeani. So he says, listen, I understand. God didn't rile up his world, meaning it's clear the rain came for you, and it's clear it came from your God. I give you that. Okay, and that's why we were saying before, maybe it was the right time. But I still have something to say to you. In other words, I still have an argument against you. I could still get my money. Guess what? The sun set already. Look, it's black outside. And the rains came on my time, not on your time. So what's Nakdimon left to do? He doesn't know what to do. He's beside himself. He goes to the Beit Mikdash, right? He can't make time go backwards, or maybe he can. We'll see. So he goes back to the Beit Mikdash. Again, he wraps himself and stands in prayer. Go show him that you have people you love in the world. The clouds move away and the sun comes out, right? The simple reading of the story is it really wasn't nighttime. It just looked like nighttime. Sometimes we know that. The clouds come out. It's black because of the rain and the clouds, but really it's not nighttime yet. So stories even in the Gemara where they thought it was Shabbat, they brought in Shabbat and then it turned out it wasn't Shabbat yet. So what happens? If the sun hadn't moved, right, and changed, well, we'll see what Nikdira is soon. But if that hadn't happened, I could have actually gotten my money, but I guess I can't. And that's the end of the story. So now the Gemara says, Tana lo nakdimon shmo ela buni shmo. Really, his name was Buni, not Nakdimon. But lama nikra shmo Nakdimon sheniktira chama ba'avuro. That the sun moved for him. Okay, now according to some of the interpretations here, and we're going to see in a second, they're going to compare him to Yoshua when Yoshua actually made the sun stop. That maybe God actually did turn back time. And really it had been nighttime and God brought the sun back out. So there's a debate about whether to explain what happened in the story. Was it a total miracle or was it just that it appeared as if it was nighttime, but it wasn't really? Tanu Rabbanit. The sun came early for them, meaning, right, or time was changed somehow. So Moshe, Yoshua, and Nakdimon ben Gurion. Okay, these were the three people that were able to play with time or use time to their advantage. Bishlaman Nakdimon ben Gurion, Gemara. We just had the story, right? Gemara means it was a tradition. We got it from the story. Yoshua Nami, Kra. Okay, Yoshua, there's a clear pasuk. It says, Dichtiv. Vayidom Hashemesh v'yareach hamad, right? First, Yoshua says, Shemesh b'givon dom v'yareach be'emak ayalon, right? Make the sun stop, make the moon stop. And it says, Vayidom Hashemesh v'yareach hamad, right? And they were able to continue fighting in the daylight. So it's, right, the sun stopped. Ela Moshe, where did Moshe do it? Did you catch a time when Moshe did this? Minana. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Okay, we're now going to have three different ways of learning it from different verses, but it's all going to come from this one verse by Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Dvarim when it says, Hayom hazeh achel teit pachtecha v'yiratcha al pnei ha'amim, or in Dvarim, Pasuk Bet, Perak Bet, Pasuk Kafeh, chapter 2, verse 25. On this day, I will start to put your fear on the other nations. Okay, the other nations will start to fear you. Okay, all the nations under the heavens. They're going to hear Shimacha, your reputation, and they're going to be fearful of you, basically. So now we're going to, stand in awe. The question is, to what was Moshe deserving of this awe? So the first one's going to darshan, Atya achel achel. Okay, from the word achel, hayom hazeh achel te pachtecha, I'm going to begin to. Also, the word achel appears by Yoshua, ktiv hacha achel te pachtecha, that's by Moshe. Uktiv hatam achel gadelcha. In the third chapter of Yoshua, it says, I'm going to start to make you great. Right? The whole issue with Yoshua in the beginning is he's worried, how are people going to accept me? It's compared to Moshe, right? Moshe was so great. Everyone thought he was great, even though he did have his issues. But for the most part, people accepted him. Yoshua doesn't know how he's going to fill those shoes. So God says, uses the same words there. So that means the Yoshua, now it's interesting here, there we're comparing Yoshua to Moshe, but this is going to compare Moshe to Yoshua. Must be, he did the same thing, okay? Because when it said, Achel te pachtecha, it meant I'm going to do it the same way as happened with Yoshua, which really means like this. Yoshua can't be greater than Moshe. So he's going to have the same greatness that Moshe had, which means if Yoshua was able to stop the sun, Moshe must have also been able to. Rabbi Shiur bar Nachmani amar atya tet tet. The next word, achel tet pachtecha. I'm going to give, right, put the fear of you into the other nations. And ktiv hacha achel tet pachtecha, right, by Moshe. Uchtiv hatam by Yoshua, and this is a better verse because this is the verse in chapter 10 when actually Yoshua makes the sun stop. B'yom tet Hashem et emori, the day that God gave the Emorim, lifnei b'nei Israel, Yom Eleinei Israel, shemesh b'givon dom v'yoreach b'emek ayalon. So in that pasuk where Yoshua asked the sun to stop, it says tet. Therefore, we're going to compare tet there to the tet by Moshe. And we're going to assume, again, the same thing happened to Moshe. He was able to do the same thing as Yoshua. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no, it's not from the beginning of the pasuk. God will eventually, will put your fear. But it's from what it says there. They're going to hear all about you. What could they have possibly heard if not something amazing like what Yoshua did, that he was able to stop the sun. And therefore, we assume that Moshe must have also stopped the sun at some point, even though we don't know when he did that. Okay, next. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said at the bottom of Yud Chen Amud Bet, we have a city that doesn't have rain, and then we have another city next to it that does have rain. So we saw this in the beginning of the Masechet, where Amar Yehuda Amarav Ushtehen Lekala, both are actually cursed, right? You would have thought the simple reading is the one who has rain is blessed, and the one who doesn't have rain is cursed. It's like one city gets cursed, and the other one does not. But Yehuda says in the name of Rav, this pasuk doesn't mean what you think it means. They're actually both cursed, because if one doesn't have rain, then the other eventually will have, even though they have rain now, eventually it will affect them. So now we're going to see 4 other verses, which are the reverse. This we thought was a good pasuk, at least for one city, and it turned out to be negative. Now we're going to see all these pasukim that appear to be negative, and Rav Yehuda, either in the name of Rav or in his own name, is going to say that these pasukim, even though they're negative, there's actually a positive angle to them. Okay, and again, this has to do a lot with perspective, right? How you look at something. You could look at it and see something that's bad, or you could look at it another way and say, well, actually, there's something good about it, right? The way we talked about the rain, how rain could think of it as bad, you could also think of it as good. That means Yerushalayim is like a nida, outcast, okay, even though nida is not exactly someone who's outcast, but she has a tum'ah about her, right? Nido even is from the same root, out, excommunicated. Amar Yehuda, libracha, what do you mean? This is like a bracha, kinida, like a nida. Manida yesh laheter, a woman who is a menstruating woman who has an impurity about her, has a way to fix it. She goes to the mikveh, she's fixed. Likewise, Af Yerushalayim yesh la takana, Jerusalem will be fixed. Hayta ka'almana, Amar Rav Yehuda libracha. Also, it's like a widow. These are all psukim in Eicha, Lamentations. So Rav Yehuda says libracha ke'almana v'lo mamash, like a widow, but not a widow. A widow would be without a husband. Like a widow, what does that mean? It's a woman whose husband went abroad and he plans to come back. Okay, so that's the way Jerusalem went into exile, but they're going to come back, right? God's going to come back to them. They're not totally lost. I'm going to make you low. Okay, you're not going to be important. So Amar Rav Yehuda libracha delo mukmina minan lo reshi nahare velo gizri pati. You're not going to become, I would say it in modern words, politicians. That's a good thing, right? Who wants to be a politician? Politicians are people are hated by people. I mean, I'm not saying don't go into politics, but we all know that politics can be dangerous and they can be putting you in a position where people are critical of you, people get upset with you. In this case, the head of the city is also the one who often takes taxes. People hate the people who take taxes on people. So basically, there's things to be said about this that, it's a positive thing not to be in that kind of position. This is the 4th one and the last one. God is going to smite the people the same way a reed will move in the water, basically, right? What's a reed? It's very weak. It just kind of falls over. This is a blessing. Now we're going to see the following thing was said by Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani in the name of Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, this is a verse from Proverbs. The wounds of someone who loves me are steadfast. Okay, they're loyal. But the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Okay, so what does that mean? The curse that Achia Shiloni cursed the people when he talked about the split of the kingdom. the son of Shmuel, Rechavam, and it's going to split him. Yeravam ben Nevat is going to take over and things are going to be bad. And then he says the Jews are going to go into exile. That bracha, which is what we said before, that's what Yomi says. That's better. The bracha that they got from Bilam, who really wanted to curse them, but ended up blessing them, better what Achia said than, which was a curse, than the bracha of Bilam. How so? Achia shiloni kilalam b'kaneh. He likened them to a reed. Amar lehem liYisrael. V'yikashem et Yisrael kasher yanura kaneh. God will smite you the way He smite, the way the reed flutters, moves. So first of all, what do we know about a reed? It sits in the water, okay? And if you cut it, it will grow back. It has a lot of roots, very deep roots. The winds could come, doesn't matter. It still stays in place. In other words, yes, it'll wave back and forth, but the base of it always stays where it is. Therefore, right, it goes with the winds. But as soon as there's no winds, the reed is still where it was to begin with. He said, you're like a cedar. Now, a cedar is a very strong tree. That seems like a great blessing. But, okay, and it says in parentheses, but this is the verse, whether it's supposed to be in the text or not. Okay, like the reeds. So I'm sorry, like the cedars. Okay, that now cedars aren't normally found next to the water. If you cut it down and you leave a tree stump, it's not going to grow again into another tree. It doesn't have a lot of roots. Now it's true that most winds are not going to blow this cedar tree because it's very strong. But if the big, heavy south wind comes, it'll uproot it and turn it upside down. And not only that, okay, so that's already the differences between the two. But we'll tell you one other thing about this reed, and we'll talk about that at the end of the next story. The kaneh was chosen to be the object that we write our Sifrei Kodesh with. Our holy books are written with this kaneh, okay, which we're going to talk about. It's all about humility again. We've mentioned this idea a lot before. Tanu Rabbanit. And now we're going to hear a really good story, or a complicated story, I should say. So people should always be soft like a reed and not hard like a cedar. Where do we learn this story for this from? From the following story. Okay, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, that's the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was with his father in a cave, right? The famous story when they come out, right? And he burns everyone he sees because he can't handle the average person, right? He thinks he's above all of that. So this story is also going to show the same thing. He comes from Migdal Gdor, which isn't really a place we hear about much. It must be one of those names to be darshaned. He comes from his high up tower, and a Migdal is a tower. From the house of his rabbi, he's riding on a donkey with Tayel Asfat Nahar. He's by the water. This almost reminds us of the story of the Adon and the story with Nakdimon, where he's got this smile, smug smile on his face, like I've got everything going for me. And he was arrogant, right, about it. He was feeling good about himself. High, because he learned a lot of Torah. And he said, I'm on top of the world. Guy starts walking next to him, who's very ugly. Okay, Rashi says that this is Eliyahu. Okay, that some people say this is Eliyahu. In any case, this very ugly man comes next to him. Amar lo, shalom alecha Rabbi. Says, hello, Rabbi. And he ignores him. And then after ignoring him, he says, Amar lo reka, you empty person. Kama mechoar oto ha'ish. How ugly is that person? Really meaning you. Shema kol b'nei yercha mechoarim k'motcha. Are all the people of your city as ugly as you are? Really an obnoxious thing to say. Amar lo eini yodea. So what does he answer him? What can you answer to something like that? He says, I don't know. Why don't you go to the person who created me, namely God, and say to him, how ugly is that vessel that you created? Okay, which makes Rabbi Elazar realize he made a huge error. So he realizes he made a mistake. He gets off his donkey. He bows, prostrates himself in front of him. Prostrates. He bows down in front of him. He says, I've answered you, right? I'm giving in to you, and please forgive me. Okay, I'm really sorry for what I did. Amarlo, Eini mochel lecha. Sorry, I'm not going to forgive you. Now, until this point, you feel like Rabbi Elazar is in the wrong. At this point, you start to wonder, maybe this guy is in the wrong, right? The ugly man, because he says, I'm still not going to forgive you. Eini mochel lecha ad shtelech lu'uman shasani ve'emor lo. Right? I'm not going to forgive you until you go to the person who created me and say to him, Kama mechuar klizesh asita, right? He's not budging from what he says. So he basically follows him. That's Rabbi Elazar is not willing to give up. And he says, I'm going to follow you until he gets to his city. He keeps following him. They get to the city. What happens? So the people all come out toward Rabbi Elazar, the great rabbi. So Amar Lahem, right? They say, oh, hello, Rabbi, our teacher. Amar Lahem, Lemiatem korim Rabbi Rabbi. So the ugly man says, who are you calling Rabbi Rabbi? Amru lo, Lizeh shemitei alacharecha, to the guy who's right behind you. Amar Lahem, Im zeh Rabbi, al yirbu kmoto b'Yisrael. Now he embarrasses Rabbi Elazar in public, and he says, if that's who you're calling Rabbi, we shouldn't wish for a lot like that. Okay, and what happens? Amru lo mipnei ma, amar lahem kach v'kach asali. Okay, he said this is what happened, and he tells them all the story. By the way, it's very interesting in light of today. You know, nowadays you can't open the news without seeing another story of another rabbi who was involved in inappropriate activities. And there's always the group of people who say, oh, he did tshuva and he's a good person and he has a lot of Torah and we should forgive him. And then you have the other side who says, what are you talking about? Prove to me that he did tshuva and I don't see that. And we have to prosecute him and we can't let this kind of thing go on. So here you see the two sides also. Now, it's not exactly the same because what he did isn't as bad, although you might say it is as bad. In any case, it's very interesting, the reaction, and a little hard to swallow. So what do they say? Who? Okay, they say you should still forgive him because he's a big Talmid Chacham, right? That's exactly the claim that people make when all these sexual activities go on with these, people who abuse other people, and then they say, oh, well, he's a big Talmid Chacham, you have to forgive him, and it seems not exactly appropriate. However, in this case, you really do see that Rabbi Elazar was trying to do tshuva about it. So what does he say? Okay, he says, I will forgive him for your sake. But we have to keep our finger on the pulse and see that he doesn't continue to do this type of thing and show this kind of behavior. He immediately goes into the Beit Midrash and he starts to teach. And what does he teach? This is where we started. He realizes his mistake and he starts to teach. He says, listen, you have to be soft like a reed and not arrogant like a cedar. Okay. And that being better to be rach like a kaneh. And I'm basically, it's fascinating. You could say this, right? I'm changing my personality, which I don't know how easy it was for him to do that and whether he really succeeded, but he seems to really be remorseful. And that's why we write our Sefer Torah with the kaneh to remind us not to ever be arrogant. Okay, right, which is exactly what we have in this Masechet. We've talked a lot about the arrogance and how bad it is. And it's also appropriate when you have this issue of rain and the rain's coming and the people praying for rain and then they get answered. You have to worry always about the arrogance that's going to come with that. Hey, God, listen to my prayer. So does that mean I can be arrogant and I can assume that God will listen to me and do whatever I want? And it puts you in this complicated position. On the one hand, we want people who can pray. On the other hand, when they get answered and they get exactly what they want, it could lead to arrogance. Okay, next section in the Mishnah. Right, if there's a building falls down. So now we're going to talk about buildings falling down. Tanu Rabbanit. Mapolet she'amru. Okay, when they talk about a mapolet here that you're supposed to, what are these? These are days where we institute fast because of that. So when they said a mapolet, briot velo ruot, it would only be if you had a very healthy wall that collapsed. If you have a wall that was not well built or was falling already, it was already starting to rot and it fell down, we're not going to institute fast for that. That's just human error. That's just a mistake. That's not a calamity that God's bringing. Okay. And you think about all these cases that we've had of buildings collapsing, whether it be Meron or the building in the platform in Meron, or the building, or there were a few stories in Israel where things happened. And, years ago, there was that building, there was a wedding hall that collapsed, and there was another one, the shul that collapsed, the tribunal, and anyway, all these stories. And in Miami on the water, we're going to get to that very soon. All these things, that's not a calamity upon which we say God is punishing us. That's just stupidity, you could say, right? Or reckless behavior, that people didn't take care of things. That's different. So it's a very good line, right? So briot v'lo ruot, she'en ruyot lipo v'lo ruyot lipo. Only if it's ones that weren't supposed to fall rather than ones that were likely to fall. So now the Gemara says, isn't that the same? Isn't that the exact same thing what you just said? Healthy is not supposed to fall, and falling apart is what's ready to fall. Hey niu briot. So what do we mean by briot? And hey niu she'enan ruyot lipo. And what do we mean? They're not likely to fall. Hey niu ruot. What's considered faulty? And hey niu ruyot lipo, ones that are going to fall. Lotzricha. The second category of ru'uyot or ein ru'uyot is dinaflu machmakov hayu. If they were built, let's say they were too tall, right? So from an engineering perspective, right, you could build with sturdy material, but if you build it in the wrong shape and it's too tall and not wide enough at the bottom, it's going to fall. So that's what we mean. Inami dekaima naguda dinara, or like the Miami, right? It's on the banks of the water, and then sometimes the water washes it away or wears out the material, and then it would be the second category. Now we're going to see some stories. There was a wall that was about to fall. It wasn't built well in the Harda. Rav and Shmuel would never go near it because they were always worried it was going to fall. Even though it stood for 13 years, they were always nervous that it was going to fall on them. One day, Rav Ad bar Abba comes along. Hey, he said, let's go around, right? We can't go near here. So Shmuel, Rav says to him, today we can go right by there because we're walking with Rav bar Abba, and he is a man he has a lot of merits. And because of that, we can walk with him because it's definitely not going to fall today. It's very interesting, right? And then they basically walked, and apparently it didn't fall. So Rav Ad bar Abba, we're going to hear more about him, and then ultimately we're going to understand what did he do that gave him these merits. Rav Huna had wine in a particular house that was falling apart, and he wanted to get the wine out before the building fell and all the wine got ruined. So what did he do? He said, I'm going to take Rav Ad bar Abba. Maybe he knew the story of Rav and Shmuel. I'm going to take him with me. I'm going to bring him into the house. He'll save the house. So as long as he's there, the house won't fall, and I'll get my wine out. But he didn't tell this to Rav Ad bar Abba. So what did he do? He brought him into the house. So what did he do? To get Rav Ad bar Abba to stay in the house while he was undoing all the barrel, taking all the wine out, he basically started talking Torah to him so that he'd keep him in the house with him. They walk out of the house, nafal beita. The house falls, comes crashing down. Rav Ad bar Abba was obviously a smart guy. Argish Rav Ad bar Abba, he realized that he was being used. Ikpid, he got very angry. How could you have done this? Now, why was he so angry? First of all, he wasn't honest with him. And second of all, you can never go into a dangerous situation assuming a miracle is going to happen. Even if Rav Ad bar Abba had these merits, he said, what? Maybe, I can't always expect a miracle. Maybe a miracle won't happen. I could have died under there. And even if you would, you can be sure a miracle is going to happen, which you couldn't anyway. But I used up a bunch of my merits on that one. I wouldn't have used up my merits for that, but I know you were doing that. Amar Rav Chanan, Maikra, how do you know that you can use up your merits? Dichtiv, katonti mikol chasadim mikol haemet, right? We read this in the parsha a few weeks ago with Yaakov goes to Esav, and he says, katonti mikol chasadim, I'm already less because of all the chasadim. God has already given me so much good. That already means I have less merits going for me. So what made him so special? He had to itmar, as it was said, Sha'alu Talmidav l'Rabbi bar Abba b'meh erachta yamim. Why did you live a long life? Okay, not only that, we see he had a long life. Amar lahem, yamai lo ikpadeti b'toch beiti. I never got angry at my household. Okay, I never got angry, right? We should all strive for that. Never get angry at people in his house. I never walked before someone who's greater than me. I never thought words of Torah when I was going through a dirty place. I never walked 4 cubits without Torah or without tefillin, right? Without talking Torah or without wearing tefillin. I never slept in the Beit Midrash, not a nap or not a real serious sleep. I was never happy when my friends fell, right? When they made a mistake in the Beit Midrash or something, I never got excited about it. I never called my friends by their nicknames, which were generally derogatory, or by their family's nicknames. There's a bit of a difference about a debate about what hachinato and chanichato is. But let's go with his own nicknames or his family's nicknames. So that was about Rav Ada bar Abba. Now we're going to go back to Rav Huna. Rav Huna apparently also had a lot of merits to him. So Rava says to Rav bar Papa, Lema lam mar mahani milemal yatadava avi Rav Huna. I want to hear some good things that Rav Huna had done. Can you tell me about them? Rav bar Papa is one of the guys in the Shiur. Remember all the sons of Rav Papa. Amar lehu biyankute lo dechirna. So Rava says to him, listen, Rav bar Papa, says, I don't remember him in his youth so much, but sivute dechirna. But I do remember when he was older. When it was a rainy day, he would be carried out in a big golden carriage. And he would go check out the entire city. Any wall that was about to fall down, he would break it. If the owner could rebuild it, he had the money, he would rebuild it. Below Efshar, and what was he worried? He was worried the wind was going to knock it down. It would hurt someone. So he would break it before so it wouldn't hurt anyone. So if the people had money, they could afford to rebuild it, they rebuild their own wall. Below Efshar, Yomi dide. If they couldn't afford it, then he would give them the money. Every Erev Shabbat is a very interesting story. You can wonder about whether this is a good thing or not. Every Erev Shabbat, Friday afternoon, we go to the shuk, anything that the people selling the vegetables had left at the end of the day, he would send a shaliach to the shuk, a messenger, to buy up everything else that was left in the shuk and then throw it in the river, right? Big, huge waste. So they're going to ask, at least give them to poor people. But then people will know, they'll get wind of this after 1-2 weeks. And then they'll just say, oh, we're going to get the food anyway, we're not going to buy. And then those people will lose their money. So, so give it to the animals. Well, throw it to the animals. We can't do that because you can't buy food that's meant for people and give it to animals. Okay, the question is, what does that mean? You can't buy animal food that humans can eat? If you buy it as animal food, it's fine, but you're not allowed to buy food that's meant for food for humans and buy it for animals. There's all different people to talk about this. Are there ways to do this? Halachically, I'm not going to get into that now. Why didn't he just not buy it at all? Then the next time, the people will bring less food, and then the people won't have enough food to buy for Shabbat. So in order to keep the system going, he would basically buy the food and throw it in the river, even though it was this huge waste. It's good, really, it is a good question how he could have caused so much waste. Another good thing he would do. When he got medicine, he would hang it outside his house and say, whoever needs, come take this medicine. Some people say he knew how to deal with this shivta, which was one of these evil spirits, that you would basically, that's the evil spirit that you wash your hands in the morning. So not everybody had water. So have a manach kuza demaya v'dale leva amar called the srich le'teva le'ol delo l'staken. He would say to people, come take water from here so that you won't have this shivta on you, and then you'll get in danger by it. Have a karch when he would break bread, he would eat. Have a patach levave v'amar. He would open the doors to his house and say, "Kol man ditzrich le'teva le'chol." Anyone who needs, come and eat. This is like what we say at the Seder night. Amar Rava. So Rava's reaction to all this was, I could see myself doing all these things. Except for one that I really couldn't do. The last one. There's a lot of people in Mechoza who are very poor. And if I open my doors, I'd have nothing left. I'd have nothing to feed my own family. So he said that one I'd have to draw the line out. But the other things that Rav Huna did, I could actually do. With that, we will end for today. A day of good deeds, right? Think about what you could do today to make other people's lives better. And with that, wishing you all a very good day and a happy Hanukkah.